What water resources do we have in Dayton? Well, I guess you can break that down into three major water resources that I can think of. And the first, obviously, is the Great Miami River. And the second water resource is the Buried Valley Aquifer that's underneath the Miami River. And then the third water resource, I think, is that we live in a wet temperate climate in the middle of the continent, which means that we get a fair amount of rain compared to other segments of the country. So we really have three water resources.
We have wetlands here, we have rivers, we have trails that you can ride on. It really makes for nice amenities for residents of Dayton and the surrounding area. So
I think it's also important to, pay attention to and be familiar with where you are, because you build up your own, sense of history of this place.
The rivers were really, the channels of transportation, and that's how they got from, the Ohio River all the way up this far into Ohio. And then because of that, the canals were built following the same north-south route as the river. And then because of that, the railroads were built following that same north-south path, and then 75. So it's just really cool to see this progression from rivers as the transportation channels to the other more recent transportation mechanisms following that same pattern. That's why Dayton and Troy and Piqua and Sydney all exist, because they're located in that strategic transportation avenue.
I think that oftentimes people discredit the role that geography plays in terms of place. I think place is incredibly important. It's why people built Chicago on Lake Michigan, or why people love going to Denver because it's in the mountains. In Dayton, we have rivers.
The way that people bring people back into the city is to bring them to the river, I think, because water is such an elemental draw on people. And so, as far as recreation, as far as even industry using water, as far as economic development on the water, I think there's a lot of potential for that.
Our watershed is what I consider to be a huge asset in terms of the wildlife that we can support, the kind of recreation that citizens and residents can have as an amenity. I think it's even more important just because it defines Dayton in terms of geography and place.
You see that the river becomes almost like a magnetic pole, and I think the more we exploit that and the more we use that, the more vibrant our city will become. I think that natural water can be used to provide focal points for communities. That is places where people all gather together in large gatherings, where people leave, kind of their individual walks of life and come together with a lot more people. And the biggest example I can think of for that is in Cincinnati, where they have tall stacks for one, and they also every year they have the WEBM fireworks on Labor Day, and they shoot fireworks off the barges in the river, and everybody comes downtown to the riverbanks or the bluffs overlooking the river to watch the fireworks, tune into the radio, and they have parties and things like that. And it's become this ritual that happens every year, and I think that's really, really, really something, because it brings people together. And I think that kind of ritualization needs to occur for communities to be strong and vibrant and, concerned with each other rather than people's own individual walks of life.
Well, I think when people get outside and when they have positive experiences outside of, their house and their work, they really feel connected and they appreciate where they live more, and they establish that sense of place. And so key things like having great parks and having recreational opportunities and having rivers that you can just go to and enjoy in many different ways, I think gives people a sense of identity. And in doing that, they feel proud of where they live and they want to better it.
Pretty much every time I'm out on the water kayaking, it's a really cool personal experience. It's very peaceful out there. I paddle along and then I go out, by the bank, and I drift in the trees for a while, and that's a really relaxing, very renewing time for me.
I also really like it when fish jump in your boat when you're paddling along or kayaking or canoeing. It's just crazy. It's almost like the river comes out and reminds you that there's life in it.
I notice things like patterns and textures and line a lot. Like, I look at structure. You build up your own, like, sense of history of this place. Even if it's not really in the form of a list of facts, by just being observant and looking at places and things and people.
That's something that appeals to, I think, the human spirit. Like, people are drawn to water, people are drawn to mountains, people are drawn to beauty.
I decided to just take off my shoes and socks, and I waded out a little ways into the river, and I just stood there for a while and just felt the cold water encompass my feet. And it was one of the most calming experiences of my life. Like, it was just one of those moments that you have where everything is still and everything is okay.
It's just that sense of peace, and you have a crazy week, doing whatever, doing homework and going to meetings and different things, and then usually on Fridays we just go out there and we paddle, and you just take this big deep breath and you let everything go and just soak in being outside, and it just always makes me smile.
I mean, we obviously all get caught up in our day-to-day life, and it's so hectic. So when you do have those few moments of stillness and pure calmness, that's very refreshing.
The fountains came on in the middle of downtown, and we were on the bank, and we were kind of debating amongst ourselves, should we go play in the fountain? If we're going to play in the fountain in the middle of the river in our kayaks, we're going to get soaking wet, and we're going to be cold because we got to go inside and get talked to at MCD and all these places. We all went and we decided we're going to play in the river. We did, and it was awesome. It was like paddling around in a hurricane. It was cold for the next 2 hours after that, but it was definitely worth it.
There's some really big pushes in the Dayton region to get people to realize what a great resource the rivers and the aquifer are. And I would say that's mostly the metro parks with Five Rivers Outdoors and their initiatives to get people out paddling and encourage fishing, especially on the Mad River, and teach people the skills they need.
I guess every natural system has a carrying capacity. Humans can do so much to it without really altering the system in a way that makes it more difficult or impossible for humans to live there. And down in, say, around Atlanta and Georgia and out west, we've had problems with scarcity of water because human populations there have exceeded the carrying capacity. Well, in Dayton, we have, I think, a much larger carrying capacity because our water resource is larger. And I think what's going to be interesting to see in the next 15, 20 years is water resources out west become so tight that people might even start moving back out east. And I think the main challenge that we have to face in the next 15 or 20 years is as the population of this region starts to grow again, which you can forecast perhaps that it will. We have to develop in such a way that we take care of our water resources and safeguard them so that we can essentially use them for our purposes, but use them in such a way that we can sustain that in perpetuity.